Thank you, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Appreciate you all being here. Thanks for the opportunity to share a little bit with you. So my name is Kevin Doerr. I'm the Chief Product Officer for Marqeta. What that means is I lead the product management teams, the design teams, project management, and a few other odds and ends, really around developing the vision for the product, the roadmap, and then driving the execution of the teams to be able to deliver on behalf of the company and our customers. So I'm excited to answer a few questions. I've been with Marqeta about a year and a half. My background is mostly large product and engineering teams, building typically distributed systems, lots of dependencies, lots of complexity that's fun to work with. And I've had a chance to work in and around a few other developer programs, including the one here at Marqeta. So I appreciate the questions that came in. And what I'll do is I'll just dive right in and try to throw some light on some of the questions that have come in from folks that are out there. So I think there's a couple of things there, and I'll share a bit about some of the areas that are priorities for us right now. We're building, or they're coming very shortly. One, you should expect us to continue to round out our core products and APIs in issuing, processing, and settlement. We've been really fortunate and worked hard to sort of take that hill of modern card issuing and processing, and we have no intention of losing it. And so that means burnishing those APIs, those transactions, and all the functionality around that. And in terms of growth, I think it's both in terms of what we offer, the flexibility of the APIs and the customization of features, but also how we offer it. The what we offer is more APIs, more richness, good docs. The how we offer is how we're supporting that, how we're surrounding the functionality that we provide to the developer community with all of these sort of accoutrements, right? So not just docs, but shared libraries, objects, SDKs, and now with community, more of a forum, right? The ability to get into a knowledge base, the ability to have more interaction with our developers. So that's the sort of how we're delivering the capabilities that we're building in the background. In specific, the things that we have a pretty high priority on, we've launched into the credit business. We have a beta program and a couple of programs that are coming online right now in the credit space. That's new for us. We're super excited about that. We're treating it the way that we've treated our other APIs and components. And again, high level of flexibility, customization, really, really well supported developer platform to be able to build use cases and scenarios in credit. We're also prioritizing our growth into the digital banking area. So as we build out more banking as a service capabilities, we go far beyond ACH, direct deposit, and some of the conventional methods of moving money into some of the more sophisticated, global, and sort of extensible matters in terms of money movement or money movement modalities. I think the thing for us is how quickly can we continue to iterate on the set of functionality that we have in a given area, how well can we package it, and then how strongly can we support it for the developer community. Another area of focus for us is around developer experience, adding more sophistication to the dev dashboard, making it easier and more seamless to transition from sandbox all the way through to production as an existing customer of Marqeta. Those are a few of the priorities, and we'll talk a bit more about some of the other areas of investment and things that you can expect from our product team over time. It's a great question, and it's a great follow-on to the first broader question of our product roadmap. The way that we think about sort of banking as a service, it's not banking as a service in a box. And part of the reason is that every customer we're working with has a different use case scenario in mind. Right? They have different set of requirements. Their go-to-market is going to play out differently. The things that they want to focus on and differentiate around are quite different from the next person we might work with. And so building the broadest possible platform, to the point of the question, is the answer, which is, okay, let's make sure that we've got the core account types that we need, right? GPR, DD, DDA, ACH origination. We're already on path with many of those and a few more. And now what we need to do is continue to flesh out all of the other money movement modalities. Some that were mentioned in the question, like check deposit or check issuance. They go to being able to get your paycheck early through direct deposit. They go to the ability for mobile check deposit or even wire transfers, some things that are a bit more conventional. Marqeta is on path to be able to build out that stack to allow our customer to be able to pick and choose the capabilities that they want to create that highly differentiated experience. That is very much part of our roadmap. And we'll do that in a couple of ways. One, there are components we believe are core competency for us and we're going to become world-class in. And then two, there are areas where we might partner with other fintechs in the space who offer terrific opportunity or help accelerate our roadmap so that we can get that functionality to the developer community. We think a combination of build and partnering is a critical way for us to be able to get to market faster and allow our customers to build their applications more quickly. The other thing that comes to mind when we talk about sort of the future is when you get past many of the conventional sort of money movement modalities. We love seeing the progress in some of the areas around DeFi and some of the non-card rails that we've seen start to accelerate. We can go way out there and talk about things like the Lightning Network, or we can be a little closer and start to talk about some of the payment modalities that exist in different regions around the world. We think those all become part of our roadmap over time as we move through this stack and continually iterate and provide capabilities to our developer community. Really good question. It's always super challenging when every one of your metrics or objectives are kind of scaling very, very quickly ahead of you. A couple of things come to mind in terms of scaling the team. One, building recruiting muscle is a really, really critical factor. And that means having the bodies to be able to manage the pipeline of potential candidates that you want to bring into the company, having a really great process around screening, interviewing, getting people through those loops in a way and getting them feedback so they understand where they are on the process. So all of that sort of systematic work needs to be put in place in order to really scale. Another aspect to scaling the organization is understanding when people are coming into the organization, what does that onboarding process look like? How seamless can we make that? Especially the first 2 weeks, how quickly can we get engineers from be able to sort of sit down in the organization and be able to check in code? What's the shortest possible time and route that we can take to be able to get them to contribute to what we're doing here? And then in the longer term, where's the training, the onboarding, all of the areas around getting an engineer from zero to super productive in our environment? Those are things that we focus on in terms of scaling. Organizationally, one of the things that we want to do, and we've done a little bit in the past, is create a very modular organization. When you know you're going through a period of sort of monotonic growth, you want to have the opportunity to create modular sets. So you can change organizations, you can bring in new leadership, you can elevate existing employees into places of leadership and get more leverage. And so the more modular your organization can be, the more flexible it can be, the more you can adjust your flying formation to be able to meet the current need. And whether the current need is simply transaction volume scaling dramatically, or the number of services that you're offering and the complexity is going up, usually those things happen in tandem, or you've got other scaling issues where suddenly you've got a rush of customers at the front door, you need to onboard and get into production and transacting as quickly as possible. All of those things become a bit easier if you've got some of the preparatory work done in terms of scaling. There's lots more conversation around sort of hyperscaling in there, but those are a few things that I think about specifically with respect to the organization and some of the things that you do to get yourself set up to be able to take on those scaling challenges. Really good question. So today we transact natively in the US, in Europe, and a bit in Asia. But we take transactions from probably close to 40 countries at this point, and we intend for that number to grow dramatically over the next few quarters. Every year we're launching into new regions with new profiles and things like that. I think as it relates to KYC, I think the question comes from this particular spirit, the complexity of understanding the requirements in each one of those countries, each one of those regions, what's specifically required from a regulatory or a compliance or a governance point of view, and then what's specifically required to be able to integrate into maybe local systems that can help you do some of the authentication and identification that are necessary. What you'll see from us typically is we'll build a core platform first, and that platform will contain 75 to 80% of the functionality that we need to be able to plug into local systems to be able to effectuate the KYC. It'll also include all of the systemic tracking, logging, status updates, notifications, and alerts that are required in those environments. And then as we go through the process of getting a better understanding of how to move to KYC in a particular region, let's say Canada, which is different from the US, we'll start to factor in all the unique characteristics, different elements, and also the sort of oversight of compliance and regulatory to be able to build a product that will meet the needs of that particular country. We could get into all sorts of pieces about, government issue ID versus local ID, the availability of those, the sort of background checks and distributed system nature of being able to validate, oh, I've got a passport photo now. Let me go validate that with the regulatory body that governs that. Each one of these countries can pose a significant amount of work. And what we're trying to do is build a platform that gets us most of the way there. And then that last mile of specific product characteristics or features will relate directly to what's happening on the ground in that particular country or that particular region. We've been super successful with KYC in the US, and we've been ramping volume with some of our large customers over the past couple of quarters. Real excited about that. The last thing I'd say on KYC is I think this leads us down the path where we start to talk more persistently about identity, how we can use KYC as a stepping stone to establishing true identity of a customer. What we really want to be able to do is be tightly coupled with our customers' programs, and therefore tightly coupled with their customers to get a really great understanding of where those consumers are or where those businesses are relative to risk profile, activity, opportunity. We've seen a lot of this happen in the BPNL category, BNPL category, which has grown substantially for us, is our ability to provide risk information about a particular transaction or a particular customer has a tremendous amount of value for our own customers. And so you see us continue to invest in KYC, both here domestically, but also internationally. So this is a super interesting question. I'm not sure I completely understand the approach here, but what I can say is our partner companies, let's say programs or commercial or technical partners, are going to be governed by the same oversight in terms of both the regulatory environment, compliance, rules around FinCEN and things like that. So I can't speak specifically to the use case scenarios of moving money from card to card and whether that could yield maybe, let's say, Forex arbitrage. I think that's the question, but again, it's hard to tell. I think that's a better question for either one of our program partners or one of our customers to sort of discern with their compliance folks, with their legal folks. We're happy to weigh in on the conversation on what's possible, but I think that one's a little bit more challenging for us to sort of think about as a use case scenario. That's a great broad question. The things I think about that provide significant differentiation for Marqeta and therefore for our customers and developer partners is really speed, the ability to start prototyping very, very quickly for different use cases and scenarios to see how that comes out, the ability to move quickly and seamlessly from sandbox into testing into production. And then I think the flexibility and the customization, those are the three things that I think about in terms of what can Marqeta's product solve for me. I think also in many respects, and this is one of the fun parts of the job, we find ourselves regularly in these really, really terrific product conversations with our customers who are thinking about the next thing that they want to do. And so our ability to sort of participate creatively with them in the process and say, that's a really interesting use case scenario. We either hadn't thought about that or hadn't built to that, but maybe we should, because there's a lot of opportunity there to solve a problem that customers have. That is by far sort of the canonical ability to be at a whiteboard with your customer and be problem solving creatively in real time. But I think the flexibility and the customization that we bring with our APIs is so central to being able to have that creative conversation. I think that's the biggest kind of sort of solve that we have for our program partners and customers, basically. This is a really hard question. This is like asking me to choose a favorite child. I'd probably say curiosity is the number one characteristic that I look for with people. We could talk about energy, absolutely. We talk about technical proficiency, yeah. We talk about execution capability and propensity. All those things are critically important. But if I've got a candidate who's super curious and whose own roadmap, let's say, is sort of has evidentiary proof of I've done this, I've done that, I've done something different. I'm a little bit off piste here, maybe unconventional. You can start to see the curiosity that individuals bring to their lives and their pursuits. And that part for me is super, super compelling from a product management or a design perspective, because the implication for someone in the role is that they're going to go hard at problems. They're going to take a hypothesis, they're going to go unpack that, they're going to tear it down, they're going to look into the dark corners, and they're going to ask themselves very presently, how could I be wrong about this? Who else should I talk to who might have the answer? And that's all driven through a curiosity to both solve a particular problem, but also build a great solution to it that you can be proud of, that's sustainable and scalable. And so for me, being forced into sort of picking my favorite, I'd say really an innate and sort of insatiable curiosity is the characteristic I look for with any prospective employee. Wow. This is a great question for me. I have been really fortunate to work with just outstanding teams in very different areas over the past 15 to 20 years. And Marqeta is no different than that. Amazing people, incredibly talented. I actually feel more blessed in this environment because I don't come from a fintech background per se. And so the opportunity curve for me, which is, how much can you learn, how fast, has never been steeper. And so learning about financial infrastructure, payments, all the regulatory and compliance stuff, I actually find that kind of fun because I like to compare and contrast between countries and regions. And I also like to tie it to some of the macro trends that are happening, a bit of nationalism that's happening in different countries or regions around the world. How will that affect infrastructure, payments, and then consumer behavior? But I think that the biggest thing here for me has been being able to learn from the people on the team and the people that are coming on the team. I have very much a sort of asynchronous relationship. I remind people I'm learning way more from them than they probably are from me, but I find that super valuable. The things that I want to pick up on, I want to go deeper on understanding global payments. I believe cross-border payments, and there may be a question about this later, cross-border payments will play a particularly important role over the coming years. How we efficiently build solutions for our customers that can easily move money cross-border, handle all the Forex, handle all the timing issues, handle all the expiry and timeouts that happen typically when you're trying to move money cross-border and deal with a complex interdependent set of regulatory requirements and compliance requirements, and also just sort of how the existing infrastructure works in one country versus another. I think that's an area that I really want to go deep, and I want to see Marqeta start to execute against more aggressively. Another area that I really would like to go deep on is a better understanding of how payments infrastructure ties into lending infrastructure. One of the great benefits of being at Marqeta and being able to participate in how we're changing the world of payments and financial infrastructure is to be able to push on how do we continue to create solutions that enable customers to deliver democratization, access to financial products. So how do we push on that all the way into things like lending and other areas that allow both consumers and small businesses potentially to have microloans, to be able to support their businesses and when there are cash flow issues or when there are particular opportunities they want to take advantage of. So I think going in that direction is an area I definitely like to learn more of. And then more scaling, building businesses, building product teams, being able to deliver at high quality, at short intervals, and be able to continually increment the value that we're delivering to customers and developers on our platform. That one actually is a pretty easy one. Outcomes only. The only thing that matters really, and in particular talking to this group, is did we deliver the thing that you needed? Did we deliver it in a fast enough turn that you were able to do what you wanted to do? And does it have sufficient quality, scale, and I'd say sort of thoughtfulness in terms of whether it's instrumentation, logging, alerts, notifications, sort of the full surrounding support for a particular feature or a component. And so I think the outcome is the thing that I really focus on with our product management team. In order to get there, we go through the entire process of why are we building something? What is it? What does the PRD look like? What's the return for our customers? Where's the value point? We go through the execution process, of course, measuring our own velocity measuring our estimation skills, measuring our ability to deliver things on time or the time frame that's been desired. So I think velocity is interesting for me, but ultimately, what I want to focus on is the outcome. What was the value that we delivered to a customer? What was the value that was created for Marqeta? Is it differentiation? Was it revenue opportunity? Was it opening up a new geographic region? And that outcome is where I push to get our product management teams focused as maniacally as possible, right? A full understanding of what that outcome is supposed to be, a full understanding of the measurement to ensure we know when we're getting there and how we're progressing on the way to that point. Those are all the measures that I really care about. One of the things I've learned from product people way smarter than me earlier in my career is you don't celebrate releases, you celebrate success. And there are two different definitions for that, right? We all talk about what's the definition of done, what's the definition of a release. But really, by focusing on the outcomes and having some very, very key objectives and goals, that lets you know when you've met that outcome and whether the outcome is delivery to a customer, 100 customers on a particular program, particular transaction scale you want to get to. Having a really clear view of what those 3, 4, 5 things are, that tells you when you're successful, and then you can raise the banner and celebrate. Thank you for that one. I think I love the idea that we're bringing Marqeta closer to the developer community, that we're going to become more tightly coupled. And so the ability for us to communicate, I think at higher frequency, higher bandwidth, is an outcome that I want to have happen. So the availability of our engineering team to this process, to this forum, I think is something I very much want to see happen on a regular, persistent basis. And then I want to see the value come out of that, which is, I think, symmetrical, which is there are great questions that come from the developer community engineering team should be answering. And there are also great feedback that's coming back to the engineering team that we can contemplate in terms of our own build. Right. I think this is the same conversation or theme that I referred to earlier, which is when I get a chance to sit down with customers and we can kind of enter that creative space and they can share, this is what we're thinking about building. How can you help support that? I want to see that same type of sort of tight coupling and conversation happen between our technical teams here and the developer community within Marqeta. The other things I want to see, I also want to see us be able to provide more information about our roadmap and about the technical underpinnings of what it is we're building and what that's enabling. I want to see that happen in a more programmatic way, which I applaud the team behind the community effort to bring this forward through the knowledge base, forums, QA, efforts like this. Those are the things that I'd like to have happen. The ultimate outcome, maybe going back to the earlier question, is I want the developer community to be able to move more quickly, more seamlessly, and bring their companies and their applications and use cases through that process as easily as possible. That's the outcome that I want to see come out of the community effort that we're jumping off into today. I love this one. This is a really good one. So the data points I use, I think of it as a sort of a process of synthesis, where you've got to take both known data that you have, things that are happening in your organization today, and then you want to synthesize that with things that are happening slightly outside that range, and then probably bring in even some more speculative information to try to round that out. The specific inputs that I would tell you I use to develop product strategy, I want to look closely at the marketplace, what's happening, and that's everything from how much venture money is flowing into either my category or adjacent categories. How should I be thinking about that? Because that's a clear signal to the process, right? I want to understand how big the market is growing. How are contactless payments affecting different parts of the payments and infrastructure economy? Who's playing in that, who's not? And so I'm going to look closely at the marketplace to see what's happening in real time and understand that. So I got a lot of signal strength there. I have a lot of signal strength from customers. We spend a lot of time talking with customers. There's a customer advisory board that we meet with on a regular basis to understand at a high level what the big issues and pain points are and how we're doing, what else we should be thinking about. I have individual touch points with customers on a regular weekly basis where I'm checking in on certain projects, certain implementations. We're talking about future implementations, or there's just a an AMA type of thing, like where are we going in this particular area, similar to some of the questions we have here. That's a lot of strong signal strength that comes in to both myself and the team through that effort. And so we pick up a lot of content there. I think the other thing that we look at the competitive space. And we've got to pay attention to what unique opportunities are being built either directly in our space or adjacent to our space. Marqeta's success has not been lost on the venture community or on the startup community. And we see many, many startups that are saying, I'd like to go do the thing that Marqeta is doing. I want to modernize this. I want to abstract away from the complexity of the infrastructure, provide a bunch of really great APIs and enable these new products. Like, that's great. We welcome that. But I also keep an eye on it and use that as a signal input to the product strategy. The other bits of product strategy are thinking about, what assets do I have? What have I already built? Where do I already have, an unreasonable amount of strength in terms of the technical stack, the people that we have, our view and vision on where this is going? That's another signal input in it, right? And the way we think about that is, I'm building something that's a core competency. I need to own this. I'm going to build all of it. I'm building something that's slightly adjacent. Do I want to use someone else's technology integrated with this as a partner? And so again, those are all inputs into the product strategy. The last input, ironically, is probably sequentially the first, which is the corporate objectives. What are the objectives that Marqeta as a company are pursuing? And those would be business and financial. They would be regional or geographic. They would be team size and growth and things like that. Those corporate objectives are the ones that also provide really, really strong inputs into synthesizing a product strategy and a roadmap. I hope that answered the question. There's a whole, we could spend 8 hours talking about what goes into it at a level of, really fine-grained detail. But it's a great question. Thank you. So what's happening today is we have a bit of variety across the surface area that we deliver products against. Ultimately, our goal is to move to releasing daily, to have all of our services releasing in that fashion. We're not there yet. We have some services that are actually quite close to that, and their ability to prop and roll, very, very quickly. They tend to be the smaller services, the ones that'll have lower impact in terms of live site production areas. Majority of our services release on a weekly basis. And then we have a few services that are a little bit behind that. They tend to be much larger. They tend to have be much more widely distributed, meaning that the number of dependencies that they have on, let's say, the card networks, our bank partners, and our program partners themselves require us to move a bit more slowly than we'd like. But again, our goal in the end is to move all of our services to a point where we're iterating daily where we can, weekly where we must. And that gives us, I think, the velocity that we need in this space. Like, just going back to the product strategy question, as the competitive environment continues to heat up, it's incumbent upon us to move more quickly to be able to support your efforts. And so when and where we can do that, we want to move the entire superstructure to be able to deliver as quickly as possible so you can pick up that next feature and start to implement it and build it into your own app. Yeah, that's a really good question. Durbin, I could just throw out a bunch of one-word answers here. The constraints over fintech are pretty, they're expansive. They're not isolated in one area. Earlier in some of our questions, we talked about KYC and things like that. And so there's a fairly sizable breadth of things when it comes to sort of regulatory compliance, being able to meet all the requirements that we have as an operating company in the fintech space. I think the difference between this industry and others is really that almost everything you're building, at least in our case, from the Marqeta point of view, is subject at some point in some way to a regulatory control, guidance, or a fixed barrier. You can do this thing, but not that thing. And so what that requires us to do when you start with sort of product planning is we need to be intensively focused in the product planning stage to say, how are we going to handle moving this service to a place that's compliant consistently in a scalable way, in a fashion that's as highly automated as possible. And there's one more bit to that when we start to talk about what the PRD looks like, and that is how much of that, I want to call it overhang, I don't mean that to be pejorative, but how much of that weight or burden can we abstract away from our customers and build into the technology? And so the core goal for us is not to shy away from the compliance issues and things like that, not to shift the burden downstream to customers or programs, at least where we don't have to, but it's actually to build it in the technical stack itself, to be able to accommodate, to be able to provision for, and whether this is reporting, auditing, being able to sort of spit out the right data at the right time for the right regulatory body. Our focus is being as planful as possible on the front end, so we can build a process that's as lightweight as possible for developers and for our customers. I think that's the key difference in terms of how we think about the product and building it. The key difference for Marqeta as sort of an operating entity is that there is a heavier burden. There is more work to do to be able to measure up to the requirements of being in this business. And that is, for us, it's a cost of doing business. We choose to do it, and we're choosing to do it in a way that's as differentiated as possible. Again, in the way that we talk about our products and things like that. So it's a great question. I think it adds, I know it adds some percentage of weight to the entire planning process, and that can have an issue with velocity. And so the other thing that we rely on is an incredibly talented team of folks who work in compliance for Marqeta, folks who work in security, and also folks who work in the finance organization to help us make sure that as we build these products, we're building them in the right way and we're building them as efficiently as possible for our customers. That's a great two-parter, actually. The things I'm excited about, well, I'm excited about the work we're doing and the progress we're making in a couple of our sort of really important stacks. We talked about digital banking, we talked about credit, talked about sort of the supporting cast, if you will, everything from settlement to disputes to how we manage data and share data back with our customers through our dashboards and portals, like all that, what I would call sort of the extensive wrapping around the core services that are needed by our customers. I'm excited about that in terms of payments. The thing I'm excited sort of externally about payments is the pace. As grim as the pandemic has been and what it's sort of visited upon everyone and all companies, it's accelerated use case scenarios and consumer behavior in a very positive way for more modern payments. We're all using digital wallets. We're all using contactless, all being subject to percentage distribution. The fact that we've moved so quickly in this is having the US catch up with other countries that are further ahead and have been further ahead for different reasons. But it's also giving us the opportunity to create more applications that can leverage the behavioral change as well as the underlying technological changes. Those are the two things that need to happen in order for new use cases to be realized and new opportunities to be sort of cracked open. One, you've got to get a change in behavior, right? You can sometimes induce that, but that's incredibly difficult. Most often you're picking up on a behavior that already exists and you're modifying it in a different way. And that's what really this change in contactless payments and digital wallets and the adoption of virtual cards has been. That's been a huge change for us. So I'm excited about the pace with which that's happening because that opens up more use cases and more creative ideas. I am excited, this might sound boring, but I'm excited that the regulatory bodies that think about payments infrastructure and things like that are thrashing. That means they're having to confront some of the sort of long-term systemic issues around how payments are made, who owns the channels, who owns the rails, and they're pushing on things like FedNow. We're still sort of waiting to realize a spec being confirmed, but the idea that they're pushing on real-time payments at a regulatory body level, I think is a very encouraging sign for us. I think it's encouraging that we're having to have the conversation around cryptocurrency and stablecoins as well. The irony, I don't want to be too sort of current events, but the irony of cryptocurrency issues finding their way as a central discussion point of the infrastructure bill in Congress is terrifically interesting to me. It means that the conversation has become elevated, and we're going to have to confront what do we think about stablecoins? What do we think about USDC? What do we think about cryptocurrency? How are we going to put the right kind of regulation and process that will allow innovation to continue, but also bring these currencies, which is what they are, and the way that they move, typically on a blockchain or a chain, into the light, so that they can be properly exercised upon. We don't stifle innovation, and we can create the use case opportunities that need to be created to change the way money moves. So I'm super excited about that. DeFi and the things that are happening there, specifically the Lightning Network, I think is really interesting as a prototype or the model of how we're going to move money in the future, with, aside from cards, which continue to be huge portion of the money movement. So I'm super excited about that. Trends I'm sick of hearing about. Nationalism, I think, is challenging, and nationalism around the world, which has a bit of a macro view to it. The way that it affects us, and I think together it affects us, is what considerations do we need to have in place as we go into a new region? Data sovereignty, data residency, differing privacy laws that need to be tended to, both technically and operationally. That continues to sort of increase the challenge for going into a particular area and being able to offer services and products. So I'm a little sick of hearing about that, but unfortunately, that continues to be a macro trend that we'll have to synthesize into everything else we do. Another question, Marqeta has just hired a new CTO. How do you see the relationship between technology and product organizations, and how do you establish a great working relationship? Really good question. I think one of the things that's interesting, so we introduced Randy Kern as our Chief Technology Officer about 2.5 months ago. I'm super excited to have a partner join the company. The really exciting thing is both he and I have run both product and engineering organizations. And so having been on both sides of the fence gives you an appreciation and understanding for what each team should be doing, is responsible for, and how to get that done in the most efficient way possible. So I think that's a big part of the relationship, in terms of making sure that the teams are very tightly coupled in the work that they do together. The second thing at a super high level is, the relationship that Randy and I have, or any CTO and I have. It's got to be a partnership. We've gone to great lengths to connect early on, to communicate to all of the teams, this is the thing we do together. And then we follow up on that in terms of how we motion, the staff meetings that we have, the way that we talk to the teams as a collective we. The consistency of that coupling and how we present that to the team is how we start the process of making sure that those teams stay together and operate together efficiently. So much of leadership is sort of being able to model, this is what we want to have happen. Randy and I talk, we'll argue, we'll differ, and then we'll come to agreement and consensus around this is the way we should do the thing. More often than not, we're not arguing. We have a lot of sort of philosophical principles that are the same, and I find that fantastic. So creating that great partnership at the top level, moving that down through the leadership and making sure that's the model that we want people to observe and act against. I think the other more practical things is, in terms of product and technology and design, is making sure that the product team is getting out far enough ahead, right? There's a bit of product, we're always out in front. You need somebody way out on the horizon, finding out and synthesizing some of those macro trends we talked about earlier, bringing them back for input and signal. You want the product team working on, 70% of, what our business is today, 20% what it's going to be next week, and then 10% a little further out in terms of planning and things like that. You want a bit of horizon planning. So getting the product team in a position so we can be working closely with the engineering team now, but also being able to lead a bit more and really pull not just the tech organization forward, but also pull our customers with it. And I think that's how you get a great symbiotic relationship between product and technology and design. I think that's probably the end of the questions that came in, Ricardo and team. Is there anything else that's come in since that maybe I could address?
No, those are all the questions that we have right now.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, everyone. I really appreciate the interest and the questions, and super excited for our developer community to start to come together. And from Ricardo and the team, you'll be seeing more features and functionality over the coming quarters.
Thank you, Kevin, for taking the time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Ricardo. Bye-bye.